there are certain statements or phrases that are so memorable, so much a part of our story that we can just know immediately. Say a few words and you know where it came from, you know who said it, and it also kind of draws you into the whole story. Let me try a few with you. We the people, right? Declaration of Independence, and that draws you into the whole story of the birth of our nation and everything that went with that. 77 years ago, Gettysburg Address, Abraham Lincoln draws you into the whole Civil War and everything that went on around that. A day that will live in infamy. FDR, after Pearl Harbor, and it draws you into the whole story of World War II. I Have a Dream. Martin Luther King Jr. And again, it draws you back into the events of the whole story of the civil rights movement in this country. Or how about this one? I'm making it up as I go. Indiana Jones, and it draws you into that whole movie genre. Or Luke, I am your father, draws you into the whole Star Wars story. You got the idea. Do you understand that Church World has the same thing? If I said, God so loved the world, you'd be able to complete it. John 3:16, that he gave his one and only son. That's like the gospel in a nutshell. Say the phrase, our Father, and you're launching into, oh, that's the Lord's Prayer. Say, I believe, and then you're drawn right into the creed, the Apostles' Creed, which is where we're going the next 3 weeks. Now why do you call it Apostles' Creed? Wasn't written by the apostles. It's not like Peter's sitting there and saying, well, let me write this line, and John, what do you think about that? And James writes a line, and Thaddeus writes another one, and then Peter edits here and there. It was pulled together in its form hundreds of years after the apostles went to heaven. It's called the Apostles' Creed because it expresses the Christian faith. But maybe you're asking, well, why do we need creeds at all? Why do you need these statements if it just expresses what's already there in the Bible? Why don't we just open up the Bible and go from here to there and say, oh, that's what we believe. That's what it says about God. And we can do that, and we do that. But there's a useful function for creeds as well. Any of you guys watch the hit show This Is Us? The sometimes annoying thing about This Is Us is I like the show, but it jumps all over the place. You're in the story of the Pearson family and these 3 triplets and their parents, and sometimes you're right in the present, and sometimes you're way back in the past, and sometimes the really annoying thing for me is they jump to something way in the future, and you're like, oh, how in the world is that going to fit or connect, and how does it put back to here? And for guys like me, I mean, it's a nice writing technique, but a synopsis of how it all fits together would be really, really nice. And that's kind of what the Apostles' Creed does for us. It got me to thinking of God's story, which is a really, really big story. The Bible's 66 books and thousands of pages, and it's the truth about God. The truth about who God is and what he does for us, and there's truth here and there and everywhere and all over the place, and it's all truth, but it helps us when that truth is also pulled together. When there's sort of a summary or a synopsis or a snapshot, as it were, and not just saying this is what I believe or we believe, but because it's drawn from the Bible, which is God's truth, it's really God saying, this is me. This is me. This is who I am. This is my story, and this is who I am and what I've done for you and how I love you. So today we're going to get into that first part of the Apostles' Creed. I believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth. I believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth. That draws us back into the very beginning of God's story. First page, Genesis chapter 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. Now, I can't prove that that's true, but if it's true, if God made the world and everything in it, including us, then that tells me that God is really, really, really awesome. I mean, think of it. He's not even working with a lot of material here. He creates all the matter, energy in the universe, and then he organizes all the matter, energy in the universe, and he puts it together just with a word. He speaks, and it happens. That is amazing. It is awesome. We have a really, 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 really big God. And if you're going to have a God, isn't that what you want? You don't want to. I'm reminded of on the first Avengers movie, and Loki struts out there and he says, "I am a god," and then Hulk comes out and whams him, boom, 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 puny god, right? You don't want a puny God. You want a God who's almighty, who's all-powerful, who's undefeated, who can't be destroyed, who can not only, who can bring worlds into being, who can do anything and everything. And that's, if the story of the Bible is true, that's who our God is. Almighty, all-powerful, invincible, awesome. And you can see that as you look at the world. Now again, I can't prove that God made the world and everything in it, but you can look at the world, whatever perspective you come from, whether you believe God made it or not, and say, wow, there is plan and order and design. You can look at it and say, wow, what complexity in the way that the systems of things all work together. You can look at it and say, what beauty there is in the world in so many different places. The ability for adaptation. I mean, you can see that everywhere you look. Now, there's a lot of people that say, hey, it's random chance. The Bible tells us, the Creed tells us, it's God. And if it's God, again, what does it say about the God that we worship? How awesome, how incredible that He is. I mean, just think of the beauty of the world. The stars on a dark night, the sunset, the mountains, the beaches, any beautiful thing that you see. And you're like, wow, if God made this, He is an awesome artist. He can really put things together. How about if you look at the systems, the way that the systems in the animal world or the plant world, things like photosynthesis, our human body, the way the different systems all work together, and they're really, really complicated. The eye, how complicated just that one part of the body is, for all the things to work together so that we can see. And again, if in fact God made this and it didn't just happen by chance, you're like, wow, who could think of all this and plan all this and plan for all these things to work together? The place where our world sits. The earth is exactly situated for life to exist. And life as we know it couldn't exist in different places, and it, again, could randomly happen, but if God just did that and created it, how amazing that he chose it to be just in the right time and place and in order for us to have life. The mathematical probability of all this happening, it's like 15, 16, 17 zeros out that says if one little thing goes off, this doesn't happen. Again, it could be random chance, but if God put it together when just one little thing off could have gone wrong, that is, again, how awesome and amazing our God is. Or think about the vastness of the universe. If the Bible's right, and God made the world and everything in it, He's the maker of heaven and earth. And you consider how big the universe is. And then the Bible says this, Isaiah 40, verse 12. He measured off the heavens with His fingers. So it's like God measured the expanse of the universe just with His fingers. It's like that's a small part of what He did. And how big is the universe? I mean, it's really, really, really big. By one measurement of the known universe right now, let me bring it to scale, because we're not going to understand things like light years. I don't even think we're going to understand this. If you got a stack of papers like your announcement insert that's there today, and you stack them top to bottom for the length of the universe, how high do you think that pile of papers would be? A couple miles, 100 miles, Everest? 31 million miles. That's how far we've measured out. If 31 million miles of paper would be the size on the scale that we could see of our known universe, and we think the universe is even bigger than that, and God says, and I'm way bigger than that, and I put it all together. If it's true, our God is awesome. If He can do this, there is absolutely nothing that He can't do. And by the way, that's why we still pray to our God too, because God can do anything. Because He still not only made the world and everything in it, He takes care of it, He preserves it, He protects it, He provides for us each and every day. We believe in an awesome God. Let's circle back one more time. I believe in God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth. We've talked about how if that's true, that we have an awesome and amazing and almighty, all-powerful God. And that's the sort of God that you want to believe in and worship if you want to believe in a God. I've also mentioned that we can't really prove that that's true because none of us were there. But I want to draw you into this line of thinking right now. What if it's true? And if it's true, does it in fact lead logically to a better place, to a more satisfying and joyful world than one where everything just kind of happened by random chance? I believe that it does, and in three very important areas. The first one's value. Go ahead and write that down. Value. You see, culture today says that your value comes in your production, in what you're able to do, and what you're able to produce, and how you're able to perform. And if you don't perform, what happens? You're cut, you're cast off, you're thrown away, you're deemed inconvenient and not necessary or valuable. And that's kind of the logical conclusion of if everything's just random chance anyway. But God has a different viewpoint. If in fact God made us, our value isn't in our production. Now don't get me wrong, the Bible does say that we produce things. God gives us gifts and talents and abilities and He expects us to use them. If you have a doubt about that, go ahead and read Matthew chapter 25, the parable of the talents, and you'll hear Jesus explaining that, yeah, we're supposed to use the things that He's given us, but our value is not based in what we produce. Our value, if God made the world and everything in it, is based in the fact that we're made by God. We have value just in who we are, that we're a child of God, that we're a member of the human race, that we're made by God, gifted by God, given by God unique talents and abilities, loved by God. Loved by God whether we perform or not. Listen to what the psalmist says, Psalm 139, verse 14. I give thanks to you because I have been so amazingly and miraculously made. What that's saying is our value comes because God made us, because we're His children. We have incredible value in who we are, period. And that means worldview-wise, there's no place, if our value isn't just being a person, there's no place for prejudice. There's no room for throwing people away just because they're inconvenient to us. God made us all the same. We're just people, and we have value in that. Second thing that I think there's a greater value if we believe this is in fact true, and it is in the area of moral values and moral obligations in society. Now, a lot of people argue today that there are no real absolutes, or not very many, that you just determine your own truth, that you don't impose your views of rights or wrongs or morality on anyone else, that morality is kind of free-floating. But if there is nobody who set it in motion, there's no God who made the rules of the game up, if we just evolved kind of up the food chain or even to the top of our own human species, why would it be wrong then to trample on someone else's rights? It wouldn't, would it? Because everybody's got their own code, and if I can trample on you, fine. So if God didn't bring things into being, there's no logical reason to impose rules or regulations or morals or rights or wrongs, which means I guess gulags could be okay, and political prisoners are fine. And you need something, you want something, you're stronger, grab it, take it, that's fine, if there is no God. Is that really a better world? And that's something you can ask the people that you converse with. Is that really a better world? Maybe we ought to consider that if God is the maker of heaven and earth, it actually results that the world's a better place, that it's more consistent, that it's less chaotic, that it's safer and more secure existence if God, in fact, set up the rules of the game. And the rules don't change in the middle, that there are rights and wrongs that don't change. And that order and consistency is good, and it provides safety and security and the opportunity to live at peace with one another. That too is a logical result of why I think it's a better world if in fact this is true, that God made the world and everything in it. And here's the one that maybe grabs at me most. Number 3, write down the words love and compassion. If in fact God made the world and everything in it, there's space for love and compassion. I mean, if you observe nature, you'll discover that it's a cruel world. I mean, the strong use violence against the weak, the strong survive and the weak don't, and nature doesn't shed any tears over it. The praying mantis is cruel. The cat in the wild toys with its food. The salmon get eaten by the bears. The weak of the herd get left behind, etc., etc., etc. That's just the way it is. Survival of the fittest, not mercy or compassion and love. And that's what's natural. And as people in governments mimic that, don't they? A lot. People in governments mimic that dog eat dog and the strong devour the weak behavior with what kind of results? Is that really a better world? Or is there a better way? You see, if God is the maker of heaven and earth, that means there's room or space in our lives for love and for compassion, because God pours his character into us. We're made by God in the image of God, and we're made by God to reflect God's character. Things like love and mercy and compassion and justice and kindness and love. Isn't that a better world? Isn't that a better world? In the beginning, God made heaven and earth says that you've got value no matter what. Just the fact that you're a person. It says that there are things that are right and wrong, no matter what. It says you can give and experience love because God made you to do that. In the beginning, God says, I'm special. even when I mess up. In the beginning, God says the rules don't change in the middle of the game. In the beginning, God made the heavens and the earth. It says, I have the capacity to love. And others can and do love me. From my perspective, that is a much better world than any other alternative. So let me circle back one more time, because there's one word that we haven't talked about yet. I believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth. We haven't talked about the word Father. And some of it, if God is spirit, some of me wonders, well, why in the world does he use this image of a father? I think it's because he wants us to understand something really, really important. And that's this, that we were made for relationship. We were made for relationship. And that our connection with God is not just about knowing things or understanding facts and memorizing a few things from the Bible or taking some classes. It's a friendship. It's a relationship. God made us to love us. And God made us to love him back. Let that sink in for a minute. God, who has existed in relationship from eternity, then chooses to make us, and the first reason he does is not to use us as little puppets or toys or playthings. You read the myths and legends and you'll see that that's how the gods treat people, but not God. Our God is our Father. He said, I made you to love you. And relationship means it goes both ways. I made you so that you could also love me back. And that's why I made you. Genesis chapter 1 describes it this way. God created, this is verse 27, God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. God made us in this image so that we could relate to him. And then he made us in his image so we could reflect him to others. You know that Father's Day, right? And one of the phrases I remember is like, oh, you're a chip off the old block, or like father, like son. And what's behind that is the idea that as parents, we pour some of ourselves into our kids, and some of who they are is because of who we are. Well, God wants us to understand by calling himself our Father that he's pouring his life into ours, that he's pouring himself into us, and that the best of what we are, when we show love and compassion and joy and mercy and justice and kindness, that's all because God's made us in his image, and he's poured that into us. Now here's why it matters. You see, if God is just almighty, if he's just the almighty God and he's awesome at the end of the day, because God is so big and we're so small, you feel afraid of him, right? Ultimately, you feel afraid of God and you're worried about stepping out of line, and you're worried about, is he going to zap me, or I'm going to do something, or you're worried about having to appease him and to try to work your way up to honor him somehow or avoid his wrath. But if this is true, that I believe in God the Father, the maker of heaven and earth, it means that God doesn't want us to be afraid of him. He wants us to love him, and to love him because we understand how much he loves us. Isn't that amazing? That's probably the most awesome part of this thing. That, now, yes, we have a healthy respect for God because he's God and we're not. But we have a relationship with the God of the universe more powerful than anything else, the Almighty God who stretched forth the world with his fingers, and then he used his fingers in the dust, and he made us. And he made us to love us. And he made us so we could love him back. And he calls himself Father because he wants us to know that bottom line, that's the relationship he wants, a relationship of love. And how awesome is that? Have you ever wanted to like run around with the big and powerful people? Like sometimes I was at a conference in DC and it was a business conference, and all these people are talking about their like millions and millions and millions of dollars their businesses are like creating. Like, whoa, it would be interesting to run in those circles. Or you go up and window shop in a place like La Jolla and you're like, wonder what that would be like. Guys, understand this. You have a relationship with the God who made the universe. You do run in pretty high circles. And God says, that's what I made you to do. That's who I made you to be. I made you for relationship. I'm your dad. You're my kids. Maybe it makes me think in that of like the 2-year-old kid and how the 2-year-old kid views his dad. From a 2-year-old kid's perspective, right, dad is really, really big. And dad can do anything. That's how the kid views it, right? Your dad, when you're 2, your dad can do anything. And so you ask for anything because you believe dad can do it. Now, because dad is bigger, you got a healthy respect for dad. You don't want to cross him. But even though he's so big and you're so small, you also know as that 2-year-old kid, he loves you so much. He loves you so much. And what does he do? He plays with you. He tosses you in the air over and over and over again. He protects you. He helps solve your problems. Right? You experience all that as a little kid, and your problems, which seem so big to you and maybe aren't all that big, dad solves them, and God says, I'm your dad. And I want you to understand that that's the sort of relationship I want with you. I want you to know that I love you all the time. I want you to come to me all the time. I want to play with you. I want you to be free to trust me that when I toss you in the air, that I'm going to catch you. That's who God is. Know that he wants you to know you're always part of the family, even when you mess up. That when you mess up, like a 2-year-old messes up all the time, what's a good dad do? Helps them through the messes, even helps them clean up some of the messes, and God says that's what he does. You can talk to him at any time, you can ask him for anything, and you can know for sure he loves you, right? That he loves you with everything he has and everything he is because he's your dad. That's why he says, know me as Father. I made you because I want a relationship with you, and I want you to understand how precious, how special you are to me, how much I love you. That's what the Bible tells us about God. And to me, that's a God worth believing in. That's a God way more satisfying than it's all just kind of random chance. I believe in God the Father Almighty, the maker of heaven and earth. Amen.